Every single state in the US has had at least one serial killer, if not multiple. We've been talking about this for months at this point, and it's well established that America has way too many serial killers. However, we haven't been talking about serial killers from other countries. Today is episode 1 of a new series I'm doing where we talk about the most notorious serial killer from different countries. I'm probably not going to do every country in the world because that would be insanity, but I am going to try to do quite a few countries, especially the ones that you guys ask for the most. So obviously, the first country we have to talk about is Canada. So today I'm going to tell you guys about the most notorious serial killer from Canada. Before I begin, we're supposed to be going to a hockey game in about an hour and a half, and I was supposed to film today, but I don't have enough time to get ready and then film, so I decided today I was just going to get ready while I film. So it's a little bit different today, but this is an insane story, and I feel like you guys are going to be like jaw on the floor when you hear all the details in this. So to start the story off, we are going to be talking about Robert William Pickton, and he was born on October 24th of 1949. His parents were both pig farmers, and actually, if you watch Criminal Minds, you know about the 2-part episode that is literally insanity. It's like one of the most talked about Criminal Minds episodes, I think, and it is based on this case. So Robert lives on this farm with his parents, and then he had a brother and a sister, and the sister, they ended up moving to like family in Vancouver because they felt like a pig farm was not a place for like a little girl growing up, so they were sexist. So again, they had their 2 sons working on the farm, and they made them work like all the time. Basically, their entire life was this farm. And their dad was really crappy. He was abusive, and their mom, while like they were closer with their mom, she was like very controlling, and honestly, I think she cared way more about the farm than her sons. And I say that because she always seemed to care about them working on the farm more than them getting an education or anything like that. When she would send them to school, they always smelled really bad. Oftentimes, she wouldn't let them like bathe before going to school or anything, so they smelled like manure, and they actually got like heavily bullied for that in school. Not only did Robert have a hard time because he was being bullied by his peers, he also had a hard time because he was like behind in school. So he actually failed the 2nd grade, and when he failed, he was put into like a special education class. And obviously that can be really hard for any kid's like self-esteem to be feeling like you're behind all of your peers. And so he just grew up with like a pretty tough childhood. At one point when he was 12, he was raising a calf, and he wanted it to be like a pet. Maybe he was thinking it'd be like a dairy cow or something, but it basically became his pet. He loved this cow so much. And then one day it went missing, and he starts looking all over. He's like desperate to find his pet cow. And then his parents call him in, and they say like, oh, we butchered it. And he like sees his pet hanging there butchered. So obviously that's very traumatic. And his parents just really did not care about his emotions. They did not care about his development. All they cared about was this freaking pig farm. And so obviously they're not winning any like awards for parenting, and he had a tough childhood. In 1963, when he was only 14 years old, he ended up dropping out of school entirely and getting a job at like a meat processing place. I think he was like a butcher. And so again, they just did not prioritize like his own individuality, his own development, anything like that. They just wanted him to work and provide for the family and the farm. He ended up working there until he was about 20 years old, and then he ended up quitting to focus on the family farm. In the late 1970s, his parents both ended up passing away. Him and his siblings inherited the farm, and their farm was huge. And so after his parents died, they actually sold some of their farmland to developers, and this made them a ton of money. Again, they kept the farm, they kept the pig area, like they still had a ton of land, so they still were away from like other people. They still had a lot of area and privacy. And so him and his brother actually like renovate some things on the farm. They make it end up being like a lot nicer, and they actually turn a couple of their like older buildings into like recreational use buildings. On March 23rd of 1997, when he is now 48 at this point, he was charged with attempted murder of an S-worker. Her name was Wendy Lynn Eistetter. I apologize if I'm saying her name wrong. And basically what the police were told, or what the police reported, whether or not they reported it correctly, they were told that they basically had an altercation and a fight at his farm, and he ended up stabbing her 4 times. She told the police that he had handcuffed and stabbed her, but that she managed to escape, and she stabbed him back, as she should. And so the attempted murder charge against him was there for a while, but unfortunately it was stayed on January 27th of 1998, and that essentially means it was like paused, or like it didn't go anywhere. And it sounds like it's because the prosecutors that were going to like prosecute this case and go against him decided that the girl, Wendy, who had some drug abuse issues, was too unstable for testimony, and so they ended up feeling like they didn't have enough for a conviction, which really sucks. And it just feeds into the very common system that S-workers and drug abusers are not taken seriously when it comes to them being victims. Sounds like they assumed this was a standalone case, this was like a domestic event, and they kind of dismissed it in general. Again, likely they dismissed it in part because she was an S-worker. If she had been some woman of like wealth and power, this probably wouldn't have been dismissed the same way. because drug abuse in people who are homeless or poor or S workers is frowned upon, but drug abuse in the elite upper class is something that people are happy to sweep under the rug. So during this time, after this is all happening and his charge is basically just like forgotten about, he and his brother, like I said, they took a couple of the buildings on the property and like redid them so that people could like come hang out at them. They actually redid one of their slaughterhouses and they like converted it into basically a nightclub on their farm. And you would think, based on the fact that it's like on a pig farm, it wouldn't be like a nice establishment, but it sounds like this was like the place to hang out. Businessmen, politicians, like fancy people all came to this establishment, and they would have as many as 2,000 people like at this nightclub on their farm. And they ended up calling it the Piggy Place. And obviously, like I said, all of this is happening in Canada. This is in Vancouver, and the east side of the downtown area of Vancouver was pretty low income and impoverished. This is where a lot of the homeless or unhoused people or S workers kind of were at. People were noticing that women especially, but multiple different people were going missing from this area. As we see time and time again, the pattern of unhoused people, transient people, S workers, people of color, especially indigenous people, like are just not taken seriously when they go missing. Police are more than happy to find excuses, not only in America, but in Canada as well, for not taking these cases seriously. So over time though, people are going missing like left and right, and like the numbers are adding up, the community is getting concerned, families are like basically like pleading with the community, the media, the police, everyone to like pay attention to all these people going missing. And obviously they are trying to look for anyone local who could be doing this, because it is likely that if someone is kidnapping and murdering these people, because that's kind of seeming like what it could be, if these people are linked, it's probably someone local. So they start looking around, and at one point, one of the employees of the Picton like pig farm tells the police that they found several purses belonging to some of the missing women from downtown. So they report it to the police, and the police actually come and investigate, thankfully. They get a warrant for the farm and they search for these personal items. Unfortunately, even though they searched 3 separate times, they didn't find any evidence that the people had been there or any evidence of these purses. And so they didn't know if maybe the employee was lying or if they were mistaken or what, but they ended up not being able to go forward with it because of the lack of evidence. And I don't know if they did a thorough search or if they just kind of came, said they looked and left. I'm not really sure. In 1999, however, so a little bit later, police received an anonymous tip that Robert had a freezer full of human flesh in his farmhouse. And for whatever reason, this random tip was ignored. I'm not sure if maybe they were like, we were just at the farm, we didn't see anything, so that can't be true. I'm not sure, but they ignored this tip, and they absolutely should not have. Between like the late 1970s to the early 2000s, the brothers are like partying, they're living it up, they're loving their life on their freaking pig farm, and dozens of women and people in general, but mostly women, they're going missing. Again, many of the families are like, hey, something's going on, like these people are missing, there has to be a serial killer. And a lot of the community locally is saying there's a serial killer. Some of the media has picked up on this theory, but the police have not yet looked into it adequately. So some of the women that were going missing around this time were Marnie Lee Ann Frey. She was 24 when she went missing, and she was reported missing on December 29th of 1979. Another woman who was reported missing 3 years later on April 25th of 2000, her name was Brenda Ann Wolf, and she was 32. Georgina Faith Papin was 34 when she was reported missing on March of 2001. Andrea Josbury was 22 when she was reported missing on June 8th of that year. Serena Abbotsway was 29 when she was reported missing on August 22nd. And Mona Lee Wilson was 26 when she was reported missing on November 30th. So these 6 women were all missing, all within like a similar time frame. And again, their families are searching for them in vain. Doesn't really seem like the police are that concerned about it. On February 6th of 2002, however, the police ended up executing a search warrant on their pig farm for illegal firearms that they had heard that the Pictons had. And so they execute this search warrant, and both brothers are arrested, and the police ended up obtaining a second search warrant to look around the property and see if there's anything on their property that's linked to any of the missing women that they are also investigating. This time, they do find stuff on the farm. They find personal items belonging to multiple of the missing women. So the following day, Robert is charged with the weapons offense, and then both of the brothers are released afterwards. I think they posted bail, but the police kept Robert under surveillance from this point on because they're like, we're pretty sure this guy is killing people. We just don't have enough to prove it yet. About 2 weeks later, on February 22nd of 2002, Robert Picton is arrested again. The police have been like accumulating evidence at this point. They are taking this search very seriously. Finally, they arrested him because they had started to realize that some of these girls that had gone missing, Robert had hired them, or witnesses had seen his vehicle with them last. After like investigating, looking into into his history, talking to witnesses, all this different stuff, they start to come up with the theory that they think that Robert had lured victims to his farm. He would kill them, mutilate their bodies, and then he even was feeding some of the remains to the pigs. And that's why they weren't finding remains, because pigs are omnivores. They will eat meat or they will eat vegetables, and pigs will eat human flesh. And then because they are in mud and they are defecating in there and all this different stuff, anything that they don't eat, like the bone, is getting covered up. And the police are not thinking to look in the mud underneath like a pigsty when they are conducting these warrant searches. And so they never looked there and they never saw that there were human remains underneath the pigs. They also found evidence that may have suggested that Robert may have mixed some of the human remains into some of the pork products that he was selling. I think he did this with 2 separate victims. So he literally was selling pork products to customers, and some of them had human flesh in them. So again, on February 22nd, they arrest him, and he is charged with 2 counts of first-degree murder for the deaths of 2 different women. On April 22nd, they add 3 more charges of murder for 3 more women. On April 9th, they add another one. And then on September 20th, 4 more. And then on October 3rd, another 4. And on May 26th of the following year, they add 12 more charges for 12 more women. In total, at the end, they connected him to the murder of 27 women and tried to charge him for all of them. 1 charge was rejected by the justice due to lack of evidence, but 26 remained. Now we're going to Robert's trial, and in the trial, they had quite a bit of evidence, and so I'm just going to go over some of that evidence really quickly. I'm not going to go over everything they had because I think that'd be a little bit tedious, but basically some of the main points was that the lab staff found that he had 80 unidentified DNA profiles on his farm. About half of them were female and half of them were male. So all the DNA that they did find that they were able to identify didn't even count to that number. There are other people on the farm and stuff like that, so maybe some of them aren't victims, but it seems like he might have killed over 80, potentially over 100 different people on his farm and fed them to his pigs so that they would go undetected. So he is a mass murderer, and that's really scary that he went undetected for so long. Some of the other evidence that they had in trial included a revolver with, actually, I can't really say. It was essentially a S-toy that he used to SA people. And they found that over the barrel of the weapon. And then they also found other weapons, night vision goggles, faux fur lined handcuffs, syringes with like a blue liquid inside. They found different things that could have been used for poison. They also had videotaped an interview with Robert, and they played it for the jury, and it's him basically talking about how he used an S-toy to make a makeshift silencer for his weapon, and then he used it, and they basically have his confession to him using this weapon on people. They also have a videotape of one of his friends saying that Robert had told him that a good way to kill a female heroin addict was to inject her with windshield washer fluid, because no one would think to look at that, and then the heroin would be the only thing that showed up on the toxicology report. Why that guy didn't come forward sooner and say something sooner about the fact that his friend is talking about how he knows how to kill people, couldn't tell ya. Seems like he's a really crappy guy to keep all that information to himself until there is a trial. I feel like you should have brought that to the police a long time ago, but whatever. Also end up having an interview with someone that they like show in a video, and this guy said that Robert used to tell him that he was killing S workers by handcuffing and strangling them and then bleeding and gutting them before feeding them to the pigs. And again, I will ask why this person knew about that, heard Robert talking about that and bragging, and didn't take it to the police right away. I don't understand. The only thing I could think of is maybe Robert was like threatening them to stay silent, or they were scared of him. They felt like it wasn't worth coming forward until he was caught. But that's insane that these people basically knew he was doing this. He was bragging about it and they didn't come forward. That's awful. And so many people probably died after he told them this and they just stayed silent. Prosecution also showed the jury that they had photos of a couple different things. They had photos of a garbage can they found at his slaughterhouse that had actual remains of one of the victims, Mona Wilson. So they had pretty concrete evidence, obviously, that he had killed her. Like, there was no denying that. And they had some other evidence, some photos of like some of the personal items that they had found on the farm, photos of the pigsty, stuff like that. After he was arrested, another witness also had come forward. Her name was Lynn Ellenston, and she said that she actually saw him skinning a woman that he had and this is graphic, I mean, everything I've been talking about is graphic, but this is especially graphic, that he had hung from a meat hook. He was skinning her. And then when he saw that she witnessed this, he threatened her life, said if she ever came forward, he would kill her. And she said that she didn't want to tell anyone because she was scared of losing her life. But then she also admitted that she used that information to blackmail him into giving her money and stuff. So it really doesn't seem like it was weighing on her conscience that much. So on December 9th of 2007, the jury has deliberated and they come back with the result, and they find him not guilty on 6 counts of first-degree murder, which seems insane to me, especially with all the evidence I just mentioned. They do end up finding him guilty for 6 counts of second-degree murder, but absolutely, in my opinion, they all should have been first-degree. I think that's insane that they weren't. I get that you have to persecute someone beyond reasonable doubt, but I feel like there's enough here that it is beyond reasonable doubt. So obviously, that's really, really, really annoying that these were not counted as first-degree murder. So in 2007, he was sentenced to life with no possibility of parole for 25 years, which is the maximum sentence for second-degree murder. So the 6 women he was convicted for their deaths were Marnie Frey, Georgina Papin, Brenda Wolfe, Andrea Josbury, and Mona Lee Wilson, and then Serena Abbotswick. And he was also accused of first-degree murder for the other 21 women, but again, one was dropped. And for whatever reason, I don't know why, all the charges were stayed in 2010. I think it was due to lack of evidence, or maybe the prosecution feeling like if they continued with these cases, they couldn't get him on the other 6. I'm not really sure, but basically these were all halted, and he was never actually convicted of these charges. But before they were stayed, they had tried to charge him for the death of Jacqueline Michelle McDonald. She was 22 when she went missing on January 16th of 1999. Diane Rosemary Rock, who was 34 when she went missing on December 13th of 2001. Heather Kathleen Bottomley, who was 27, she went missing on April 17th. Jennifer Lynn Firminger, who was 29, she went missing on December 27th of 1999. Helen May Hallmark, who was 20, she was reported missing on June 15th of 1997. Patricia Rose Johnson, who was 25, she went missing on January 2nd of 2001. Heather Gabriel Chinock, who was 30, she was last seen sometime in April of 2001. Tanya Hollick, who was 23, she was reported missing on November 3rd of 1996. Sherry Lee Irving, who was 24 when she was reported missing on February 22nd of 1997. Inga Monique Hall, who was 46, she went missing sometime in February of 1998. We don't know the exact day. Tiffany Louise Drew, who was 27, she went missing on December 31st of 1999. Sarah Jean DeVries, who was 29 and last seen in April of 1998. Cynthia, who went by Cindy Felix, who was 43 and last seen sometime in December of 1997. Angela Rebecca Jardine, who was 27 and reported missing on November 20th of 1998. Diana Melnick, who was 23 and last seen in December of 1995. So now that's the earliest disappearance that's tied to him. Deborah Lynn Jones, who was 42 and last seen December of 2000. This list is still going, you guys. Wendy Crawford was 43 and she was last seen in December of 1999. Carrie Lynn Koski was last seen on January 7th of 1998 when she was 38. Andrea Faye Borhaven was 25 and last seen on March of 1997. And Kara Louise Ellis, who was 25, was reported missing on January 21st of 1997. In addition to all of this, there also was a Jane Doe that they were never able to identify. He also was implicated in the deaths of 4 other women. He was never officially charged for them. Mary Ann Clark, who was 25 and she disappeared in August of 1991. Stephanie Lane, who was 20 and disappeared in January of 1997. Teresa Cray, who was 42 and last seen in December of 2000. And Yvonne Marie Bowen, who was 33 and reported missing on March 16th of 2001. In total, he was convicted of 6 murders, charged with 21, suspected of 4 more, and eventually he confessed to 49 murders. 49 murders, and they found DNA profiles for 80 different people. It was so much undetected for so long. The children of some of the victims ended up filing a lawsuit in May of 2013 against the Vancouver Police Department and the Crown for failing the victims, as they absolutely should. Reached a settlement in March of 2014, and each child was compensated with $50,000. Also, most of this trial was banned from being shared with the public, so the public had very little knowledge of anything that was happening. It wasn't until 2010 that the Vancouver Police Department issued a statement that said that an exhaustive management review of the missing women investigation had been conducted, and they made the review available to the public once criminal matters concluded. They ended up removing the publication ban so that people could see everything that happened and they could see all the times that the police failed these women and these victims over and over and over again. One journalist in particular, his name was Jerry Langdon. He actually wrote about this when everything was like unbanned essentially, and he said, quote, "The now public details of the investigation and trial appalled many. The unwillingness of the police to pursue Pickton despite overwhelming evidence smacked hard of racism, sexism, and bias against drug addicts and S-workers. Many felt that the police treated crimes against Aboriginals, drug addicts, S-workers, and in particular women as less important than they should have," end quote. And later at a press conference, Deputy Chief Constable Doug Lepard of the Vancouver Police Department apologized to the victims' families, which like too little too late. But he said, quote, "I wish from the bottom of my heart that we would have caught him sooner. I wish that the several agencies involved, that we could have done better in so many ways. I wish that all the mistakes that were made we could undo. And I wish that more lives would have been saved. So on my behalf and behalf of the Vancouver Police Department and all the men and women that worked on this investigation, I would say to the families how sorry we all are for your losses and because we did not catch this monster sooner," end quote. It's good that they took any sort of like accountability and apologized, but like too little too late. These people are dead, and many of them could have been saved if there would have been adequate investigation a lot sooner. In 2016, a book titled Pickton, in his own words, allegedly written by Robert Pickton, was smuggled out of prison and published by Outskirts Press of Denver, Colorado. Shame on them. It was offered for sale on Amazon.com, but obviously after everyone in the public was pissed off that someone would publish this thing, probably written by some serial killer, it was withdrawn. In February of 2024, Robert ended up becoming eligible to apply for parole. But on May 19th of 2024, Robert was attacked by another prisoner at the institution he was being held at in Quebec. And the prisoner, his name was Martin Charest, ended up using a broom handle. He broke it and shoved it in his face. Robert ended up dying a little while later from complications of the attack. And Martin, the guy who killed him, pled guilty for the murder and said he did it for Robert's victims. Obviously, he was just a horrible, disgusting guy. And thankfully, he's no longer roaming on Earth and harming people. But like the damage that he did will forever like remain in the community. And the victims' families are still out there suffering the losses of their loved ones. The consequences of his actions and his horrific decisions will last forever. We do not protect Indigenous women and children adequately. The rate of violence that they will experience is so much higher than what the rest of the population will ever experience. I wanted to mention that there is something called the Highway of Tears. You've probably heard about it, but if you haven't, I'm going to tell you a little bit about it because I think it's important for everyone to know about. The Highway of Tears is a 725 kilometer stretch of highway on Highway 16 in British Columbia in Canada. And this is specifically known for a very high amount of disappearances and murders of numerous different women, particularly Indigenous women and girls. And this all started sometime around 1969. And this particular case that I just told you about sparked a lot of conversation about missing Indigenous women and children. But even with the sparked conversation, it wasn't enough. We just do not seem as a society and as a system to really care about Indigenous women and children enough. And really one of the biggest things that we can be doing is using our voices, our platforms, and just our frustration with the fact that Indigenous people and people of color specifically are not taken seriously enough, are not advocated for or cared for enough by our governments, both in America and Canada, or by our elected officials, again, both in America and Canada. And trying to support Indigenous art and literature and culture is always going to be very important, and making sure things like this do not happen again. Because when we do not take marginalized groups seriously, when we write them off as lesser than, when we decide that they are not worth our protection and our time and our resources, they are more in danger. Talk about the need for protection. When we talk about the need for resources to be used for underprotected groups, we are actively holding our police, our elected officials, our government more accountable for making sure they are protecting, advocating for people that in the past they have severely let down, and honestly still are letting down. I could talk about this specifically for a very long time. If there are other resources that you feel like would be good for me to share, please put them in the comments. I am running out of time. We do have to go to our hockey game. Our team is red. That's why there's a bow in my hair. Then also let me know what countries you want me to cover next. I'm going to be talking about Italy soon. I will still be simultaneously posting the 50 states, 50 serial killers, and now I'll be starting to post serial killers from different countries. So let me know what you want to hear for both of those series soon. I love you guys. Thank you for being here, and I'll see you guys in the next videos.